Please welcome to the pod the excellent Bibio. Isn't the Nagra incredible? Because I can't hear its motor running or anything right now.
Oh, it's like a Rolex, isn't it? It's just so smooth.
Beautiful.
But yeah, it's. I'm recording it at the lowest speed because I don't know how long this will be.
Actually,
But,
I'm kind of
it's fine.
curious about that. How long's a 7-inch reel go at 3.75 or whatever?
I feel like I'd calculated this years ago when I was actually using them for field recording. And I can't remember whether it was 5-inch or 7-inch, but I've got a feeling it's about 50 minutes.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, and it's it's obviously not as hi-fi as the fastest speeds, but for speech it's more than adequate. It's still
Yeah.
I use the Nagra for I do all my mixes down to Nagra from my desk straight into the Nagra, and then usually what I do is go into the Nagra and then through what am I thinking? Yeah, it's the end of the chains, so I go through a compressor EQ and then the Nagra and then back into the computer, so it's going off tape. But I'd sometimes use the slower settings for stems, to kind of make stems a bit more interesting.
Oh yeah,
if they're
absolutely.
sounding a bit too clean. It's good for that, and you can kind of put your finger on the tape and make it wobble. But yeah, I've had it. I think I had it about 2007 or 2008, and it's never been serviced.
I mean, it's amazing inside. Have you ever opened it up?
I have, yeah. It's crazy what they've jam packed in there.
It's a beauty, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no.
Waste of
So
time,
hang on, have you got the stereo one then?
I have, yeah. I've got the IVS in my studio, and I've got a Nagra 3 as well, which I don't use very often, the mono one, which is currently in the house next to my piano. So sometimes if I fancy doing a quick piano loop pedal jam, I'll go straight to that.
Yeah, no, by all means. Yeah, I mean, I chatted with Heimbach, and he said the 3 has the craziest sound.
Yeah, I did something really geeky and A-B'd the mic preamps on them. And I think that the older ones were germanium transistors, and the IVS is silicon. But years ago, before I had any nice preamps, I used to use the mic pre's on the Nagra, the IVS, as my main preamps. And then when I started buying when I could afford decent preamps, I stopped doing that. And then a few years ago, I thought, hold on, I haven't actually compared all these posh preamps to the Nagra. And it's got so much gain, it's ridiculous. It's got so much clean gain.
Oh, yeah.
That actually you could just use it as a studio pre.
Oh, yeah, completely.
Virtually anything. Yeah, it's got a Phantom on it. It's got, different types of Phantom as well. It's got, is it 12 volts or something?
Oh,
It's
yeah.
got T-powered. But yeah, it's just a marvellous bit of engineering, and no one makes anything like that anymore.
Agreed. I mean, whenever the Nagra was made, it was ages ago. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I haven't actually found out what age mine is, because it does. Did they start making the IVS in the 70s? Because when I look at it, it just doesn't look 70s. It looks too futuristic for 70s.
Oh, yeah, agreed.
And so, but I suppose that because mine came from Richmond Film Services, I don't know whether they still exist, but I got it years ago on eBay, and they were obviously going to digital and getting rid of all their analog stuff. And so mine has probably had a lot of use, a lot of use and abuse, been hired out. And it's, maybe they had an in-house service team or something, but I got it for about 500 quid.
Same.
Which is...
I got mine wasn't stereo. Crazy. Yeah, you got the fancy one. Yeah, nowadays, there's just arsehole prices for those things, right?
Yeah, although I would pay it if this one
would you?
Completely died on me. I think so, yeah. I couldn't be without it. Even though it doesn't... Even though it literally just records sound, it doesn't do anything else. I would miss it too much, I think.
That's fascinating.
And I've definitely,
yeah.
it's paid for itself. I mean, I mixed since I got it. I've mixed all my albums on it, so it's just always been a part of it. But I used to, when I first got it, I was keen to try it out for field recording, but it takes 12 D cell batteries.
Yeah.
So you imagine the weight of it, and then you've got to carry spare tapes with you. And
I mean, you could get a generator. Like there's good generators, you know what I mean? They wouldn't make that much noise and you could just totally be off of the grid.
I mean, to be
It's pretty
honest,
satisfying.
I discovered this thing that it's a little step up converter, and it's just like a little USB thing with like it basically converts USB 5 volts to 9 volts DC, so you can run pedals off like a little battery power bank. And this was a bit of a game changer because it meant that I could sit in the garden with, if the weather was nice, I could sit in the garden and carry on making little loop jams or whatever, but completely battery powered, which is very appealing because it's very portable then. Because I'm all up for like coming up with some little portable studio that I could take places, because it's quite, I think it's just that when I go away places I still have this urge to be creative, so it'd be nice to have like a little portable relatively lightweight. I mean, obviously you could do all this on a laptop, but I just find laptops kind of uninspiring.
But yeah, looking at your setup behind you now, like there's a beautiful array of stuff, from the Roland era, obviously your guitars, and you've got, as you've mentioned, like a choice array of preamps now, compressors, outboard gear, and you've kind of clearly arrived at this point because you've been making and releasing music. I mean, what was it? 2009? No.
2005 was my first.
2005, yeah.
That's my first. That was the debut.
And like back in those days, what kind of stuff were you using then?
So some of the tracks that were on the first album, Phi, were recorded before I had a computer. So there's, I use a little sampler, the cheapest sampler I could find, which is one of the few things that I'm secretive about.
Fair enough.
I mean, there's like 2 or 3 pieces of gear that I never disclosed, but it was.
That.
It was
why not?
Partly because it's just got such a distinctive sound that I like to keep it secret. Not that it matters too much, but so I was using the cheapest sampler I could find in the late 90s, and a cassette recorder, and then a bit later on I got a mini disc recorder. So back then I wanted to make music that was more well produced, but I didn't have the means, so I had to think lo-fi. I had to think, what can I do, with this basic gear. And then a bit later on, 2002, I got my first Mac, so then I started using Logic. So there was the first album was kind of a mixture of some of those early, really lo-fi, no computer days, and then some of it came a bit later when I got Logic. But I was using really basic gear, like a karaoke plastic microphone and the mic input on a mini disc recorder for a preamp and stuff like that. So I had to, rather than trying to do something polished, I deliberately exploited the lo-fi thing. And then, after a few albums, I get, every time I got a little bit of money from music sales or a sync or whatever, then I'd immediately buy some gear. And it's just, it's all of this has come from selling music. All this has been funded by my music. So it's good to look around and think that, this has all come from my own creativity as well, which is quite a nice reward.
Oh, absolutely well deserved, man. The music is fantastic.
Cheers.
And like always, I can kind of feel a little bit of a kinship because you've explored a lot of musical territories, you know what I mean? Even though there's a distinct sound that you bring. And like, I mean, I'd like to get into that, but I mean, thinking about this lo-fi stuff, keeping on that, like back in the days, obviously, because out of necessity, you kind of, couldn't increase the fidelity of the equipment you were using. It's just impossible. But, there's a sort of, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a certain amount of growing pains that go with transitioning from that to having more fidelity. Do you know what I mean? Because so much joy comes from pushing against the machine. When that's not there anymore, it's quite weird sometimes, right? Did you have a bit of a transitionary sort of issue?
I think not really. I think for me, that transition was quite gradual to begin with. So, every little upgrade felt like such a big deal for me. Like, for instance, getting an MPC felt like a big deal, and getting like Ambivalence Avenue and most of mine Boca were mixed on a £150 Behringer desk, which at the time was like, this felt like an upgrade because now I've got a little desk, I've got a little mixer.
Yeah.
So it happened kind of gradually. And the other thing, because I'd felt like the lo-fi tapey sound was so much part of who I was as an artist, that still had to be in there. And it's sort of like the more fidelity I got and the better equipment, it was almost like I could combine this lo-fi and a more hi-fi sound together, and also preserve some of that lo-fi stuff. So it's almost like a high-quality scan of a grainy photograph, if you know what I mean, and being able to slot that amongst other sounds that might have more weight to them or more clarity to them, but still having some of that, some of that lo-fi in there as well. But at the same time, I also didn't want to, a bit later on, I kind of realized that I didn't want to just force myself to incorporate the lo-fi in everything that I do out of some kind of principle of like, or out of some kind of idea of who I am and what I do. I wanted to just let myself explore whatever. But the lo-fi thing is definitely something that I never wanted to get away from. I just wanted to broaden my options rather than, move away. So, because I'm influenced by so much music that is very polished and very well produced. So I always had this yearning to get involved in that as well. But the lo-fi, I mean, the secret sampler I told you about was used on ribbons, so it's still some of those things that I cut my teeth on are still getting used occasionally as well.
Yeah, absolutely, by all means. And then one thing that, I have to ask you about is like Lover's Carvings recording of the guitar. It's so compelling and will always be. Mostly because of the playing, quite frankly, because it's beautiful playing, man. Like, it just, obviously, it kind of, I was just recording an amazing bass player here, like playing an upright, and I was just like, I felt like my chain was so good, and I was like, I've done such a good job as an engineer, and I was like, no, hang on a minute, I could have recorded this guy with any old shit, and it sounded amazing, you know what I mean? Yeah. So it starts with good playing, doesn't it, and good technique, and even playing, and everything.
And a good sounding source helps, obviously, I mean, back in the early days, before I had all this gear, I think that the part of my approach was trying to disguise things in a way. So, so like I had this transistor amp which had no soul to it, and a really cheap Fender with horrible pickups in it, and like a Japanese, like the cheapest Fender you could get at the time. And the pickups weren't very nice sounding. So it had this really cold sound. So I had to like use means to give it some life, and that was through sticking it on a tape recorder or dictaphone or whatever. Where now it's kind of, it's more that I've got a really good sounding source because I've got nice sounding amps and nice instruments. So you don't have to do a lot to make them sound good, because you just stick a mic in front of them and record. And you know, the difference is like between different mics are not night and day, are they? They're kind of using a ribbon mic or a condenser mic. They're different flavors, but you're still going to end up with something that sounds good if the source sounds good. But I think in the early days that my source didn't sound good, so I'd found ways of giving it, character. Kind of like the Polaroid approach in a way.
I mean, obviously, you've seen the rise of like everyone's desire for a lo-fi tone. Yeah. Probably come from the fact, literally, that it's too easy to be clean nowadays. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just to everybody, like you plug something into a sound card, you'll get, a music shop now. If you're starting out with your laptop, you plug a mic in, and the mics can be cheap Chinese things, and they sound pretty good. And then all of a sudden you've got this pretty hi-fi chain, and you're just like, oh. And then suddenly they have access to plugins that make it tapey and lo-fi, and that's the way they do it. Yeah. But having done it from the ground up and having had to kind of learn about the kind of rudiments and really what does what, like what was it in those days? What was it on the Lover's Carvings? Like, how did you get that tone?
So that was actually a valve amp. That was my first valve amp. It was a Fender Blues Junior, and it was a Hofner, or Hofner, I don't know how you say it, archtop guitar, like a jazz guitar from the 80s, which I found second hand for like 350 quid or something, with humbuckers. And that was probably a cheap condenser mic or a 57. But a lot of the tone came from putting it on tape, cassette usually in those days. That was probably pre-Nagra. The Nagra is kind of too clean anyway for loads of character.
Yeah.
So I used different cassette machines. I had loads at one point from car boot sales, charity shops, but I had this. The one that I used a lot around the time, I think, was this Tandberg one, this 70s Tandberg one that was like wood and aluminium, and it looked quite nice. And the more, if I wanted the sound to be more tapey, then I would record it back to Logic and then back to tape again and repeat the process. So with the albums like Vignette in the Compost, I'd do that lots and lots of times to make it disappear into, the murk. So it's all about and running it through EQ each time and stuff. So there was also a compressor that I used around Ambivalence Avenue, a Drama Tube Station 2 it's called. There's a valve compressor, and that had some grain to it. So I used to put things through that quite a few times as well, and that really used to impart some kind of flavour. But it was actually quite hard to get.
Where would you use that? Where would you use that in the chain?
Well, I'd probably, I can't remember exactly now. I'd probably record through it, and then I'd probably, if I was going to send the what I just recorded back to a tape machine, I'd probably go through the compressor again, maybe like lay off the gain reduction and then just use it for the valve quality. And you can you can overdo it because it would get quite stodgy. So it's about choosing the right amount of regenerations. But that was quite still. I got a few decent bits of gear then, but it was still quite a minimal setup, still using cassette machines and cheap mixer and stuff. But I feel like that album, Ambivalence Avenue, was like a jump up for me. But that was more to do with skills as well rather than gear.
Right.
I'd sort of I was listening to Dilla's Donuts a lot and and kind of studying that and wanting to give my tracks more weight and getting that kind of confidence with programming beats, because prior to that, I was quite scared of making beats before that album, because I was listening to stuff that was really good and I didn't know how to do it. But everything that I know is kind of guesswork though, and I think it's just from listening to albums and listening to records and being inspired by stuff and kind of thinking of your own way how you can approximate a sound, and never knew the actual proper way of doing it.
Yeah, one of the big mysteries to me about all that stuff, and I've never known how to do this, is just how to kind of compress the beats properly. That Dilla thing, it just feels like the compression is so, it's crazy, and it's sort of like doing a lot of the work, just like squishing all of the layers together. What did you find worked for that?
Well, I never really felt like I, achieved it to that level, but now, actually, my attitude about it is probably a lot different. I think back then I was thinking there was this magic box out there that would make you sound like Dilla or Madlib. But now I think really it was just that the people like Dilla used his ears a lot and chose the right sounds, and maybe didn't rely on much external stuff. Maybe it just it was really about just really listening to those sounds, and then if a sound doesn't work, scrap it and use a different one. That's kind of how I imagine a lot of really good hip-hop producers back then, because especially working from an MPC as well, and quite possibly mixing it within the MPC. But I don't know. I quite like the mystery though. I quite like to, obviously I would ask if Dilla was still here and I ever met him, I'd ask a million questions, but sometimes it's good to just for it to remain a mystery.
Yeah, no, by all means. But that is interesting. I mean, you're not the only one I've spoken to that, and I feel the same way. I have a fear of beats. I still have a fear of beats. I have a fear of beats because they're so, they can really, damage what you're doing so brutally. They can just ruin it, can't they? If
Absolutely,
the beat it's just right, it's just it's so much better without it, I get that live as well. The kit always sounded the same for every song.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
it's
I'm with
just
you on
a
that.
hard thing, man. It's like, wow.
Especially the live thing,
Yeah.
you go and see a lot of bands or hear live recordings of bands, and I know what you mean about the drums as well. It's like there's this kind of generic way of making them sound, and there's no character, which makes it even more mysterious when you listen to James Brown live, because you hear live James Brown, JB stuff, and it sounds like the record. It's like, how do you do that? And maybe we're overthinking it now. Maybe it was a really simple approach, and it was just about tuning the kit right and playing it well.
And probably only one mic,
Yeah.
Before I leave the tape thing, like, I'm curious about this regeneration and using the tape multiple times, because that's a really cool technique for people who do have access to cassette or whatever.
Yeah.
But like what did you learn about like the way that hitting it with different levels like affected the regen? Did you like hit the second generation kind of softer onto the tape?
I was definitely aware of like how the levels affected the sound. So it would always be based on, I would just kind of go with my gut instincts, depending on what it was that I was putting on tape. And there are certain things that I think, particularly like mid-rangey stuff like guitar and piano, which doesn't have loads of treble, it doesn't have loads of like heavy bass. They sound so good on tape. And I remember I used to teach at Stafford College. I used to teach music production. This was like 2005-ish. And I had a group of H&E students, so like 18 years old. So I don't know when they were born, but you can do the maths. And I went in one day and did a whole lecture about this regeneration thing. And I played them a guitar clip that I'd recorded. And I played them the clean digital version, and then 1 generation on tape, 2 generations, 3 generations, 4 generations, 5, 6, 7. And I asked the group which one they prefer, and nearly everyone preferred the one that had been on tape like 7 times.
Wow. 7.
I don't know whether it was that much.
No, but I like that. Yeah.
Most people preferred the one that was like really, really wobbly and grainy.
Yeah.
And then I kind of pointed out that how many of you would actually do this? It's like, you prefer it, but how many of you would actually do it? Because it's not inaccessible, is it? You can go to a charity shop and buy a cassette recorder for like £5 or whatever. So that was quite a revelation, I think, in a way. That it wasn't just me that was obsessed with this sound, but I haven't done that for a while now. I actually tend to use tape echoes now for that sound. If I want something to sound really tapey, partly because of the 3-head thing, the multi-head thing, so you can off-tape monitor and basically do the tape, record it on tape, stick it back in the computer, and then put it back in position, and it's all in sync.
Yeah,
so I tend to use. But yeah, the question about like hitting the tape different levels, that's really. I use this RE150 space echo as a kind of tape saturator, and the input on it is the key, is like one of the key features. If you hit it
so
too hard,
sensitive.
Yeah, if like you hit it like fairly low level, but then crank up the instrument volume, it sounds different to if you hit it hard and turn down the instrument volume. And that's like a massive part of its sound. So it must be some old, components that they don't make now, because the later models didn't have that sound. So this is proper nerdy stuff, but I suppose we're allowed to be nerdy on this podcast, aren't we?
No, I mean, look, absolutely. Now, but that's interesting, actually. I've never come across a 150. I've seen them sold, but I never knew the difference. But it makes a lot of sense, because the 201, I've never particularly loved the 201, which I've had. Nowadays, I really don't favour it, because I'd rather use a Nagra, quite frankly, as an echo. Because, but then you don't have the vary speed that's like sufficient to do the thing. And I am on the hunt. I'm still on the hunt for a really vibey machine that's for tape. I think it's probably going to be something like an Ampex 440 or something. The kind of sound I'm looking for.
I'm still not satisfied with my tape machine collection.
Just that's quite hi-fi, but it's like it's got the, you know what I mean? It's fat. It's got that like. juice. We all know what it is. It's the sound of so many things from that era. And like, I mean, obviously you might be barking up the wrong tree because you can't really get the tape. But I know that if you get like Scully's and like certain era Ampex, it just has a total sound. Like, and but I'm just loath to get another massive machine. Do you know what I mean?
That might need servicing as well.
Yeah, will definitely need servicing. Definitely.
Yeah, and then that's someone visiting your studio, isn't it? You're not popping that in a jiffy.
Oh yeah. I mean, you know, I'm assuming that you would never try to emulate the lo-fi in the box.
No, I'm not against it in principle because it would go against my kind of philosophy towards music to dismiss things. Because I think everything's a valid approach, and use what you can afford. So, like someone now that has got a laptop but hasn't got any hardware, they've got all they need to make music, and they can, if they use their imagination, they can make it sound great. You know, so I'm not against emulations. I just don't use them because, for me, they. I mean, maybe someone can prove me wrong, but to me, they're not 100% of the vibe, you know. They're kind of, and also emulations can kind of sound cheesy. It's the same with film emulations, and people use film emulations on stuff. I think they're better off not doing it because it's usually detectable that it's not real, and then it feels a bit naff to me. But I think there are definitely creative ways and more imaginative ways of using emulations as part of a series of processes that could. Hold on, my mic stand's starting to droop a little bit.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm thinking of like when I like watch someone like Chad Blake, who's obviously spent such a long time mastering the in the box mix method, and he's very good at it. Like he'll use tape emulations, but they're not trying to really impart a big tape thing. Yeah. It's just a slight thing. And in a way, whenever you use a big fancy machine, you get an ATR 102 or something, and you're like expecting it to do a big thing. It's so hi-fi. You're like, oh,
yeah,
it's not even really
like that.
Yeah, so it's not really even a tapey sound. Sometimes you're a bit like shit, man. I mean,
technology seems to be obsessed with like more pixels and sample rates, and people get carried away with it. It's like, forget all that. Character is the thing that's so important. You know, I think I still record at 44.1K because my computer can't really handle.
It's happier.
Yeah, it's just like, it doesn't matter because it's about the vibe of the music. It doesn't matter whether it's recorded at 96 or whatever. Completely. I did try it once, and the difference is like, it's there, but it's not like important to me.
I know what you're saying. There's so much more character that you can give it with other things.
I did go through this little phase of going down the swapping valves in things route, you know, like obsession, like looking for like, oh, what do these mullards do or whatever. And it's like the differences are so subtle that it's like, it's kind of a waste of time to get too obsessed with stuff like that because, you know, I'll find that some like cheap plastic pedal from the 80s is like one of the most important things I've ever bought, you know. Things
totally, man.
Things like that, you know, it just...
I get you,
because it's got some character, and also, I think also with some of these things, particularly like vintage stuff, they were kind of unintentionally, they had unintentional character to them. And some of those like flaws, if you like, have been ironed out over the years. So it's actually really hard to find a digital delay pedal now that's got character. And when it has got character, it's usually some kind of fake tape processing or something. Well, I'm just talking about like 12-bit, you know, cheap, with some kind of cheap circuitry in there, and it's just sounds lovely, you know. At the time, it was trying to be clean.
But do you still use your mystery sampler now?
Very occasionally. Like I didn't use it on this album. I used it on Curls, actually, the track off Ribbons. Yeah. The looped phrase in that, which actually just runs throughout. The looped phrase, like which starts in the intro, is just loops throughout the whole track. And that was on that sampler. And I think the track Itch Your Bones was also sampled on that. And Oak Moss as well off Sleep on the Wing EP was used. But just for that one part, for that one guitar part. Because it's just got a sound, you know. It's not. It can do full band like CD quality, but it has less sampling time. So I always used to put it on the lower grade to get more sampling time, and inadvertently discovered that it had a soul.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Yeah, you seem to be able to play a lot of instruments, Like, how many instruments would you say you feel comfortable playing at this point?
Well, I would only really say that I'm a guitarist, to be honest.
Yeah, fair enough.
Like that's the instrument that I'm most confident in, and that's the one I've got the most experience in. And then when I've wanted to use other instruments in my music, so like violin came along when I was working on Ribbons. It was just about being able to play a part for a song, and relying on production techniques to make it sound as good as I could. So like, I mean, I think when I started playing violin on Ribbons, it was like a few months. I've been playing a few months, so my playing was pretty bad. But with enough takes and a bit of editing and using the right mics and standing in the right position and whatever, I could work within my limitations as a violin player until I found something that I could play. That's kind of my attitude towards using other instruments. So guitar, I've got a lot more experience with, and I can my ability is a lot higher than it is with other instruments. Same with saxophone as well. I wouldn't call myself a sax player, but I use saxophone because I can play. I kind of play the parts that I want to. If I tend to think within my abilities, and obviously try to push myself to some degree, but also I know that I'm not going to be able to like just rip a sax solo like a jazz sax player. I know that I can't do that, so I think within what I can do, and it's usually like it's usually like just a melody or a phrase or a loop or something like that. So if you think along those lines, you think within what you can do, and but more importantly, what its place is within the track that you're working on. So it's
right.
Because a lot of my music is, I think the complexity mostly comes from the guitar and the layering. Really, I'm all up for like putting in small, simple parts within a track that contribute something to the overall picture. So I don't need to be a great sax player to do that. I just need to be able to play a little tune. I'd like to be a great sax player, but there's only one way to achieve that, and that's to practice.
Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to ask you about, because across the road from me lives arguably the world's best marimba player, who I've come to know, Ji-Hye Jung, a Korean lady who is truly phenomenal. But she has to practice a ridiculous amount. She probably practices, at this point, she could probably practice more, quite honest. I'm sure she would say that she would like to. But she practices hours every day, to get those chops and to stay at that level. You have to, I mean, back in the day, obviously playing guitar, I know a little bit. I used to play guitar after school, like for hours every day. And like I was obsessed. I'm sure you put the hours in back in the day, like a lot of hours, right?
At different stages in my guitar playing history, it depends on what I was obsessed about at the time,
Totally. But back in those days, you couldn't really slow shit down, could you? So you kind of had to just sort of play stuff that you wanted to learn. Like, did you do that, like just on cassette, like just rewind the cassette, whatever, and just learn crazy parts?
Yeah, when I first, because I started playing guitar when I was about 11 or 12, and someone taught me a few chords and then kind of left me to it, and I'd learned by ear. It wasn't my first instrument, keyboard was, but I never had any like training or lessons or anything. So I just used to learn stuff by ear, melodies and riffs and stuff. It was a bit trickier with guitar, but the more you did it, the easier it got. And then it was, but I never practiced out of principle. I never practiced because I thought, I need to put the hours in. It seemed too much like seemed a bit army
job.
To me, or job, but I would put the hours in out of. So when I was at university and I got into João Gilberto as what was one thing that I wanted to learn. His self-titled album, which sometimes refers to as the White Album. I think it's 1973, and it's just guitar and hi-hats and vocals, I think. And I wanted to learn some of the songs from there, so I needed chord sheets and I needed tab and stuff to find out what these crazy chords were. And I put lots of hours into that because the goal was to learn the songs and then learn the lyrics as well. Not understand a word of them, but just learn them phonetically. And then I did the same with like Nick Drake, and that's where the kind of finger picking influence came from. Was learning Nick Drake stuff, and then you've kind of learnt some vocabulary, and then you can kind of speak for yourself with it after that point.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So I did put a lot of hours in then, but it was really it was because I wanted to learn specific things, and then I just played. Most of the practicing, if you like, that I've ever done is just trying to come up with tunes, and just doing it for enjoyment, just playing guitar for the fun of it. But I do play guitar every day to some degree, even if it's just sitting on the couch and playing something I already know But that's where songs come from. Like I'm always have to remind myself that's where songs come from, when I just pick up a guitar and I'm messing around, and then a riff comes out and I'm like, right, and I record videos to my phone as reminders. That's really crucial to how I work now, actually, because when you've built up this huge archive of like sketches, you can dip back into them and discover like little recordings you've done, even if it's just like 2 bars or 4 bars or something.
I'm curious about that. Do you have, like, this is a really important point, because I think I do the same thing, but I think I record so many of them that I kind of mess myself up, because I'm just kind of like, I'll get back to this, but I never do somehow. So I'm always impressed when people do. Yeah,
I don't think it's possible to, personally. I don't think it's possible to finish a fraction of what I come up with, because if I was to take a riff, any one of these riffs that I record to my phone, and think, right, I'm going to make this into a full-blown song or whatever, then that's time spent not working on another riff, So it's you got to choose. But also, I kind of I've grown to quite like the fact that my phone is full of hundreds or possibly thousands of little video clips of me with a guitar, and that I kind of discover them by chance. So like I'm just scrolling through my camera roll, and then I just think, oh, what was that one? And there's a picture, there's a little thumbnail of me with a Les Paul or something, and I click on it, and I think, oh, I need to do something with that. And that happened with the last album, actually. With the new album, with the last track, Fools, was a video clip that I recorded a few years ago. It was just a riff, and it just grabbed me I just opened that video just kind of randomly, just by chance, and thought, happened to be in the mood that day to go, I need to work on that. So I quite like that. That is now a part of my process, is accidentally discovering something that I came up with.
Oh, completely.
As a starting
completely.
point.
It is a note to a potential future self, isn't it? Like, look, future self, this might help. I'm not saying it's going to, but it might. And, that just the fact that it might is a lot.
And that's, I think, becoming comfortable with that is good, because I used to get almost guilty about having all this stuff that I'm not going to finish. Do you know? Guilt's kind of maybe a strange word.
No, I know what you mean. I do. It's stressful in a way.
Yeah, because you feel a little bit obliged that you've got to like do something with it. Like it's, when you got those jobs around the house that you haven't fixed, there's like a bit of wallpaper or something, or there's like something that needs paint, touching up with a bit of paint, and you keep seeing it, you think, oh yeah, I need to do something with that. You kind of feel like that about these ideas, these musical ideas, that they're jobs that you haven't finished. But actually,
that's true.
I think making all these sketches is just part of the practice of being an artist, regardless of whether you're a musician or a painter or whatever. They can't all turn into finished pieces, I don't think.
Is there a moment in your head where you're like, I'm ready to make a new record? Do you know what I mean? I'm ready to sort of get serious now and start going on a project.
Kind of, but in reality, that's not quite how it works, because there's always some overlap between my albums anyway. So it's like, even though like finishing this album and releasing it feels like a line has been drawn, and it's like, now I can move on, now I can make another album. There's a good chance that the next album will include tracks I've already started, So there's this constant flux, really, rather than this hard division. But then at the same time, definitely in terms of how I feel right now, having just released an album, I kind of feel like I'm in the mood for just listening to music a bit more, listening to other people's music a bit more, and just having a little bit of a breather. I'm still making music, but there's not like this I'm not in a position right now where it's like I've got a load of tracks to finish. Well, actually, I have been because I've been working on an EP, but that's nearly finished now as well. But I feel like there's this space has been created where I can think, I can just experiment again and mess around and see what happens. And I've got some vague ideas of what I want to do for another album, but it always turns out different to how I expected. It's just that some of that initial kind of desire tends to influence what happens to it, if you know what I mean. So like when I finished Ribbons, I thought, right, the next album's not going to be folky. It's going to have more synths and stuff. But I probably had more specific ideas back then. You know, when I started it, I probably thought it's going to be electronic or whatever, and it just ended up what it. You know, I just go with the flow, go with my own flow. I think is my approach, and just I think if you respond to what excites you and what inspires you, then it will flow better, and it's kind of more honest as well. If you rather than trying to force yourself to do something that you feel like you should be doing, I think maybe a small amount of that is good. Maybe a small amount of pushing yourself out of your comfort zone is good, but also go with what you're feeling. You know, go with. So if you suddenly feel like, oh, I want to make a disco tune, just do it. You know.
I mean, say you start that disco tune on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
You know, say you only get like a little bit of it done. First of all, how quickly do you work?
I can have a track that takes months to finish, and with certain things, like I think it was a couple of years ago, I made an ambient album in 2 days, just all like looped samples and whatever. So it depends on the music, depends on the track as well. The tracks that tend to take a long time are what I refer to as like problem children. They don't behave, and there's like something that's always bugging you about it, and then you one day you listen to it and you think, you know what, this is 10 BPM too slow. I need to do it all again, and then I need to change the key, and then I need to do it. So that happened with some tracks, and then others like SOL. There are definitely like different versions of that before I ended up doing, you know, committing to the version on the album. But tracks like Even More Excuses, I barely remember making it because it just happened. It wasn't a problem, you know, or I don't remember it being like a pain to finish that track. I just felt like it flowed. So I think really what's relevant is how much time am I willing to give to a track rather than how long does it take. I think that depends on, so like I think these days I'm like far more willing to, if I feel like a track is got something, you know, that it's worth finishing, that it's got something special about it, then I'm willing to put the time in. But if I'm also comfortable with just saying, you know what, I'll come back to that in 5 years, and because I've done that before as well. Not that I've told myself at the time that I'm going to wait 5 years, but it literally 5 years has passed, and then I've decided that I'm going to finish a track. That's happened.
No, by
before.
all means. Yeah, no, absolutely. And isn't it amazing? Like that kind of happened to me recently. My neighbor is a great pianist, and we've done a few things together, but they never like came out or anything. And then he kind of randomly sent me the songs like yesterday, basically. And I heard them, and I was like, "Man, this is great." I mean, we were on such a vibe. This is done. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like what were we thinking? Like this is a thing. This is so good. But I think at the time
didn't realize it.
Yeah. I didn't know what I was thinking at the time. I just kind of felt like, oh, this is a bit like, you know, maybe we need to work on this. The sound is a bit wrong. I was like looking at it quite analytically, you know. I for some reason, I think I spent a long time trying to get the vocals just right. And I had this approach where I wanted to sing with almost no force in my voice whatsoever. I wanted to have such a relaxed face. I wanted to be the most relaxed I've ever been singing. So I was incredibly, almost barely making sound. and I loved the sound. I was just like so into it, and I was just like, oh, this is so cool to sing like this, because I don't have any, there's none of that. I wasn't allowing any of that bitey stuff to come through in my voice. It was all just silk. And like, I was just like, damn, that. And I spent so long doing that. I think it kind of killed the vibe for me, because it's such an exercise, you know?
Yeah.
It was almost like a technical exercise of singing that I didn't want to hear it for quite a while. It turned out it was ages. And I was just like, oh, it really did work. That technique was great. I should have worked on that more. But okay. But I mean, I'm just always really curious about this, because I feel like, you know, you make a track, say you've done this disco thing on a Sunday and you got it to a certain point, you know, but suddenly maybe like you're not loving it anymore, just not loving doing it anymore. Sort of like, I mean, they're hard to generalize, but like say the next day, you sort of open it up and sort of think to yourself like, actually, you know what, this is pretty good. It just needs this, this and this, and try a few things. I mean, or do you know instantly when you hear it the next day, like, I'll come back to that?
I think I do a bit of both. I tend to have, if I'm working on music, I tend to have lots of unfinished things on the go at the same time, just so I'm not constantly thinking about one thing. You know, it's good to, you know, if you're just like, oh, I don't want to listen to that anymore, I need a break from it, then you still want to write music, you still want to work on something, then you go to something else. And I think what's kind of crucial because a lot of it, we're talking about judgment in a way, aren't we? How we judge something that we've done. Totally. So this might sound kind of really stating the obvious, but if I put like a work in progress mix and stick it on my phone so I can listen to it in the house, the ideas usually come. The ideas of what it needs, what I need to do, you know, the positive and negative feelings about it, what needs to go, what needs to be changed, but also what I can add, often come to me when I'm not in my studio, and I'm just like, maybe like cooking or whatever, or making a coffee, or sitting in the living room, listening to it. And then, because I'm giving myself some space, you know, I'm not sitting there looking at a DAW, not staring at like
so true, man.
Gear, and then I can hear what needs to be done. But I definitely get, with certain tracks, I definitely get to a point where it's like, I've worked really hard on it and I'm not happy with it, and my feelings have changed about it, and I've got kind of doubtful about it, so I'll just shelve it. You know, I don't think of it as a failure. I just think of it as, I need to do something with that one day, but I'm not in the mood for it now, and I might not be in the mood for it for years.
Do you have a special folder for those?
No, it's they all go into one. They all go into one folder. I don't bounce everything that I've done in Logic, so that's probably a bad discipline that I should get out. There's so much stuff that I have probably forgotten about, that I've saved the Logic project, but I didn't bounce an MP3 over or whatever. And I feel like I should do that more, because it will get buried. Handy. I don't go. I never go into my archives and open random Logic projects really, but I do go into like a bounced folder. You know, a folder full of like mixes of unfinished stuff.
You know what you should do, man? You should just take a video of yourself listening to the track, because then it'll be in one of your video notes. Yeah, you might stumble on.
I do actually do that. You know, I do. I usually put something in the video, because the thing is with the videos, rather than doing voice notes, is that the videos have got a little thumbnail which acts as some kind of cover for what it is, like a little album cover. So if, for instance, I find an old track that I'm working on something and it's not got to the point where I want to bounce it and stick it on my phone, I'll just grab whatever, say, a guitar that I used on the track and video it, so it's just like a little cover. Yeah. So I sometimes do that, and that's helped as well. That's kind of like
a really good idea.
It's sort of like a lazy bounce in a way, because I can still listen to it, but also there's this chance that I'll stumble upon it on my phone when I'm just looking at old pictures on my phone. You know,
completely.
You know, so I'm going through pictures of like videos of the cats, and then there's this like video of like a mixer, and then I'm like, oh, what's that? Listen to it.
I think it's important, to actually make sure you video the cats enough, so it's not just back-to-back tracks videos. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Otherwise, you just be like, nah.
Yeah, there's only so many thumbnails of a mixing desk that you want to look at, you know.
Yeah, no, totally. No, that's really interesting. But I mean, okay, but say you find that, then you've got the job of like going to the computer and going, now, what was it called?
Oh God,
You got the date, I suppose.
I had this recently, and it was a real pain because there was a track that I needed to go back to for some reason. I can't remember what it was. It was on an archive drive, but my computer hadn't indexed the drive with. This is the drive with terabytes of data on it. It hadn't indexed it, so I couldn't search for it. It was called something other than the track title, right?
Right.
So I used the method of like searching by date, you know, looking for when it was created. But the hard drive wasn't indexed, so I couldn't find it. So then I had to spend a day indexing my drive, and it was just one of those like wasted days of. It's all Apple's fault as well. Like none of it was my fault. It was just new operating system. Everything's, you know, up in the air again.
Yeah.
The dreaded.
Yeah. No.
The dreaded. I'd still be using OS 9 if I wasn't.
I
forced to upgrade
see
all the
that.
time.
Yeah. But I was thinking, every time anyone says this, I always remember that clip of Steve Albini when he was like looking through 2-inch tapes and going like, you know, people laugh at this, whatever, but you try and open your session from like 1984 or whatever on your computer, I'll race you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You've got to find the multi-track. If it's got plugins on, you're screwed. He just pulls the tape out, whaps it on the machine, presses play, and he's back. Yeah. It's actually a way better archive method than the computer.
Absolutely, yeah.
Crazy better. It's like just so perfect, except for the tape sticking to itself and all that shit. And it's expensive.
But yeah, the compatibility thing is a real. It kind of scares me actually, because I remember when the stuff that I made when I was at university that I can't open, you know, things that it just doesn't recognize them as a file.
Yeah, I kept my old loop machine, the one that kind of was my main machine that kind of like took me, you know, to all my favorite places with the loops, and I just kept that machine as like a time machine. Like nothing on it has changed. It is on OS 9. It's got the RME thing that slips into the side. Like the whole machine is like a time capsule. It's cool. I can open it up and it just opens. Yeah. I'm right back into that looper, and it's just like, it's a, you know, you think it's an expensive way of doing it, but people throw away old computers. They like cost nothing. So effectively you could just say, all right, if I ever want to open this, the files and the thing are on this computer, and I'm just going to leave it.
Yeah.
It's going to leave it on the shelf like a book. And like, hey, it's a MacBook, isn't it? But you're just like, you know, it's a funny way of thinking about it. But yeah, archiving is a crazy process. But I always am curious about this way that people deal with the stuff they make. Because you're a person that clearly makes a lot of stuff. And in a way, as we're in 2022, it's never been easier to make stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's almost like that's a problem for me. Like I can make all day. I'm mostly happy, like smoke a little bit and go in the studio and just make and make till I go to bed and just be like, oh, cool. I put it in the, you know, search for sound folder or whatever I call it. And then maybe I'll come back to it, maybe I won't. But I'm just like, damn, man, it's maybe not the best way of going about things, you know?
No, and it feels like quite, it kind of fits in with like the times that we're living, where there's just so much stuff to look at, and we kind of got our own version of that, you know, our own private version of all these bits, you know. And also I'm not a very disciplined person in general, but I'm a bit sweep it under the carpet with things like file management. So it's just like sticking on you know, I get to the point where my computer's out of space, so I just need to dump a load of stuff on a drive and then forget about it. That's kind of, you know, but I don't delete things. I don't delete things, and that's kind of a problem as well, because I've got all this just stuff that's like duplicates and whatever.
Completely.
But you know, I just think, well, it's not taking up much space. I mean, the problem is with the 2-inch tape is that imagine having thousands of tracks on 2-inch tape. You know, you'd need to buy
massive room.
Yeah, you need to like put it in storage, and so it's. I don't archive anything on tape. I've got a few cassettes and stuff that are got specific things on them.
Poured over old tapes.
Yeah, so with my Nagra, I buy fresh tape, and then when it starts to produce too many dropouts, I just change the tape.
Because you mix your shit too, right?
Yeah.
So how does that work? Do you get a bunch of tracks and go, right, I'm going to mix them all? Or do you like mix the track at the time you're into it and then like put it aside?
So before I got this 5088 console, my desk was always on and I would track through it, or, I would, when I'm working on a project, I would usually send the stems to the console and have it in front of me. And so even when I was just working on even when it was just work in progress, it was in the console. But then the problem with the 5080A is that it's got noisy cooling fans in it. So I can't have it on, and it uses a lot of electricity, so it's kind of wasteful. So it only gets switched on when I'm ready to mix something. I don't use it as part of the process with this particular console anyway. So I think it's just when I get to a point with a track where I won't, because if I'm constantly going between different projects, it means setting up the console differently every time. So it could actually be switched off for a month or more, because I haven't got to a point with a track where it's like I'm ready to mix now. But it's the bit that it's sort of like it's the most exciting part, I think, for me, is not just because I get to use this lovely console, but it's like my analogy that I always go back to is, it's like you've prepared a lasagna, and then the mixing bit is where you put it in the oven, and then it's like it's going to come out and it's ready, So it's like I've got all these stems, I've got all the arrangement where I want it. I might mix it and then change my mind and go back and change it, but usually I kind of know. It's certainly at a late stage with the track. I'm a near completion stage. So then I'll do a mix, and it's sort of like a ceremony. It's like this is where I make it sound good. This is where. Yeah. And I just find it so much easier to sculpt a mix on a physical console, on an analog console, and use outboard gear, than trying to do it with a mouse or trying to do it in the box. Yeah. Constantly like trying to like watch headroom or stuff. With this console, it's like headroom is not an issue. It can take it. So if something needs to be a bit louder, you can just turn it up or add a lot of EQ, and you don't have to back off very often. The only time that I've ever had to kind of watch the levels a bit on the console is like things like a Fender Rhodes recording. When you've got really smooth things like that and they're a bit too cranked, they can introduce really obvious distortion that you don't want, where with other instruments, it's not noticeable. So it's a really enjoyable part. And sometimes I have to, because I want to get to that stage. I want to get to the stage where I'm mixing it and I'm excited to stick it through the Nagra and all this stuff. I have to kind of like, not get too ahead of it,
So hang on a minute. You've got this album out. We haven't even talked about it. Brilliant.
You shouldn't get me on the subject of gear. That's why.
Oh, I know. I have to do I mean, it is interesting. When I first heard it, I was like, oh, I didn't even know that you had this music in your canon. Do you know what I mean? What kind of set you down the road? Was it one track that kind of made you think, I want to do more like this?
I feel like if you're looking at my previous works, it's probably most related to A Mineral Love in 2016. So there's some like fairly polished pop stuff on there with 808s and stuff. And I think I had that in mind when I was working on some of the tracks on this album, that I was kind of wanting to build on that, because those were more tracks like Why So Serious from A Mineral Love was actually just, I bought a new Moog Voyager at the time and I was just messing around, and it was just like this kind of messing around track that I sent to Olivier, and when he sang over it, it was like, wow, this is legit, So I suppose that gave me a bit of confidence in that style. So I wanted to revisit that a little bit. But I feel like there are some things on this album that were in me to some degree. I just hadn't fully realised them before, if you know what I mean. So Cinnamon Cinematic has got a bit of a bossa samba kind of thing going on with the guitar, which comes from years ago when I was at uni learning all those João Gilberto songs. So I listened to a lot of Brazilian music or listened to some Brazilian music a lot, I should say, rather than a huge range of Brazilian music. I was obsessed with a few Brazilian records. So that was always in me. Well, that's been in me for a long time. It just came out in a bit more of a yacht rock way.
Yeah.
So I kind of got kind of more influenced by things like Steely Dan, I suppose, and not just musically, but like the production aesthetic of that stuff, like 70s high end. That's something I wanted to kind of strive for, like
absolutely
very analog sounding, but very like kind of clean and precise, and so that was I think that with this album there was building on stuff that I'd sort of dabbled in a little bit before, to some degree, but it kind of got fleshed out a bit more. So like SOL, it is like the track I always wanted to make. I always wanted to make a disco track like that.
It's great. It's really good.
It just seemed like it was the right time for it to happen. I was just ready.
Yeah,
I was ready to do it, and I discovered a drummer that was really keen, and Olivier was good for it, obviously. And then Isaiah Sharkey was like, I need a solo on this. Who can I ask? And I was going to ask one of my friends who can shred. And then I remembered that Isaiah Sharkey got in touch with me years ago.
Oh wow, nice.
And we were going to meet up, but we never did. And then I think he might have been in London for a bit or something. And then he did a little cover of one of my tracks, like a little split screen video thing.
That's so cool.
I thought, I'll see if his email address is still the same one. I emailed him, and he just did it.
Oh, isn't that amazing? That's the start. Those things are so cool, right?
Yeah, and then it was just like this. That track just all came together in the end, like so.
Brilliant.
So it was. But yeah, it was. I think in the past, like I used to sample records like that, and I was really into like Daft Punk and French house stuff, and so that's kind of how I got into that kind of music. Not that I listen to a lot of disco, but it's kind of coming from that almost simplified disco in a way, doing away with all the strings and the elaborate kind of production, and just making it a bit more, and just make it almost a
nodder.
And it's more guitar based as well, I suppose. There's some riffs in there that I use a little Moog envelope filter on. These little. You can't get them anymore, but they made these 500 series envelope filters.
Oh yeah.
And I put one of the guitars through those, and it actually sounds a little bit like disco strings. That
no, totally.
Almost sounds a bit like violin or something. But I quite like that. I quite like approximating other instruments with.
Definitely.
There's a Marcus Varley track on Previsão de Tempo. Ossos do Barão, it's called, The Bones of the Baron. And it's got like what sounds like clarinets or some woodwind thing, but it sounds like he's trying to make them sound like synths. The way that the melodies and the way that he kind of layered them, it almost sounds like he's trying to make them sound more futuristic, but using woodwind.
Yeah, no, I love it.
And I really like that about it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's right. And when you've got, the budget to do the exact thing in the exact way, it's a bit like you said with tape emulation stuff, it's a bit naff because you're kind of, again, you're just sort of emulating an exact thing from an era.
Yeah.
Which actually doesn't take that much imagination. It just takes money. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's this kind of like, you get the players, you get them in the exact room, you get this la la la, and then you're just kind of like, oh yeah. It's just not as good as the original, but it sounds kind of close. But no, by all means, man. Well, no, seriously, brilliant to chat with you, and like, just it's fascinating to imagine you working. Like, somehow there's a part of me that thinks like a bit like when Aphex dropped all of his music that one time. You remember, like he just did a massive mega drop.
SoundCloud.
Maybe there'll be a time when like you're older, when you just go, I'm going to drop all those video clips you're talking about. Just drop them all.
Yeah. I have thought maybe one day I'll do that, what he did, and just, because you got all this music that I wouldn't want people to hear all of it, but there's probably a lot of stuff that I'm never going to stick on an album for one reason or another that is just going to die with me, So maybe maybe when I get to a certain point, I'll do that. But
it didn't really work for me because there's just too much.
yeah,
So I was just like in the position that he was in, like having a lot made. I was like having the same conundrum as a listener. I was like, bloody hell,
yeah,
that's too much to listen to.
yeah. But I suppose it's now that it's online, it's like it's there forever, and you know you might discover it much later down the line. You know, or that people will sort of filter out, like, you know, people might create playlists that someone's got a similar taste to you, perhaps, and they create a playlist of their favourites, and it just so happens to tick your boxes. That could happen, you know.
Yeah,
because that's kind of an interesting concept. Is that his fans, of which he has many, will create like their own playlists of their favourites, and they're like they're like different Aphex albums. Then you know they're
so true. It's true. Little bootlegs, almost like little little fan favourites. Yeah. Man, are you going out these days? Where are you based?
In the Midlands, in not far from Wolverhampton. But no, I don't go out a lot. I spend a lot of time here, but if I do go out, we went to North Wales the weekend and checking out this abandoned slate quarry there, which is incredible scenery around there, which we're looking at like possibly moving somewhere like that in the near future. But it's good to get out of the Midlands, and it's just so close to here, like the Welsh border, and it's just so different. And it's a real privilege, because most people that grow up in the Midlands like are familiar with Wales from going to like, you know, caravan holidays and stuff. So it's where a lot of, you know, other parts of the UK probably have never been, because it's kind of out of the way, you know.
Dude, make that caravan record with the looper in Wales. You know what I mean? It's like it's big quality.
It's very appealing, isn't it?
That sounds like it'd be amazing, man. I don't know. You can have your Nagras all battery powered. I mean, it'd be awesome.
Yeah,
but you know, yeah. I'd give it a listen anyway, and you know, make a nice video too.
It would, yeah.
Actually, I'm thinking about the content. Yeah, it's all about
Chris
the content.
Clark did that once. Actually, we hired a cottage in a place called Dolgoch Falls in mid Wales, where there were like amazing like tunnel, like I think it was a lead mine or something. I'm not sure. Waterfalls and like these man-made tunnels and ancient forests and stuff. And we went there just to kind of hang out and make music. And but our mode of transport to go to town to get shopping was a steam train as well, which was
it's quality.
Great. So we were on this steam train with like shotgun mics recording all the creaking sounds and stuff. But it's just more stuff in the archives that didn't get realised. You know. But it was a great exercise. It was just, you know, hanging out with someone who's like-minded as well, and I'd definitely like to do something like that again, on location. Just see what happens. No like real commitment to any particular thing. Not going there with any songs in mind. Just
totally.
Even if it's just gathering sounds, you know.
Yeah. It's always going to, like using the looper. You know, you'll get something you'll use. Yeah. It's sort of almost a guaranteed win, isn't it? Yeah. You take that caravan into a beautiful place with a few instruments. 100% you'll get something you'll use. It's just going to happen. Do you know what I mean? You'll be inspired. You'll be in some zone. But yeah, man. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. I hope what's your evening hold in store? You wake up late, you said. I was trying to work out when you wake up. Well,
today I was woken up by the postman at about 10. And then it took me ages to go back to sleep, so I woke up at like 2.
Amazing.
which is too late for me, but I go to bed like
by that.
I go to bed like between 3 and 4 a.m.
Wow. Now what's going on with that?
It's just what happens with me. Like even if I try to be, it's what I always just naturally drift into. So if I started to make an effort to go to bed earlier, I might do it for a bit, and then I'll just creep back into this. It's.
Do you have any ideas about it? Why?
Living here specifically, I think it's because I like the quiet. I like the fact that everyone else is in bed and it's just quiet, and I'm still awake. But I don't know, I was like it as a kid as well. I never wanted to go to bed, but never wanted to get out of it. That's what my dad always said about me. Never want to go to bed, never want to get out of it. And that's so true, because I always wanted to stay up late, but then the moment it was ready to get up to go to school, I was very much much happier in bed. But it's I feel more inspired later on in the day. I've never really get up in the morning and immediately start doing something creative. Never really do that.
Yeah.
It's for me that the daytime is like checking emails, watching
Work.
listening to some music, or doing things, and then later on I get this the urge to go in my studio and do something builds up, and then I go and do it later on, and I'm wide awake past midnight. I'm never tired, around then. So
you're quite protective about like what you put into your ears and your eyes and stuff, in terms of like the phone, like YouTube, all that kind of stuff, or do you just kind of go for it?
I do find myself watching pointless crap sometimes on YouTube, and I think, what am I doing? But then there have been times where I'm watching some pointless crap on YouTube and heard a really good sample, and then it's led to something. It's quite rare that happens, but
justification.
Like YouTube can be like quite a good research tool as well. Although over the years it's just become far too commercialized. People are, when people like trying to make a living from it, which I understand. It's like there's all this competition for subscribers and likes. It seemed like back in the olden days of YouTube, there was like this generosity that people seem to have about sharing their knowledge for free, and they didn't want anything. They didn't do a professional job of it. It was just like, I know how to do this. This is how you do it. But now it seems like all the kind of pro YouTubers are kind of front page, so it's kind of got a bit sickening because of that.
Do you ever listen to Athletico Mints?
No.
I suppose you wouldn't, because you don't listen to podcasts. But it's Bob Mortimer. You familiar with Bob?
Of course, yeah. I grew up on Vic and Bob.
It's his pod, like with Andrew Dawson. I mean, I recommend it to anyone, because I tell you, it's the greatest comedy. I mean, I just absolutely love it. I mean, it will make your life better. I'll give you that. Yeah. That's one I'm happy to share, because I know it will increase your life's pleasure. Many things will not.
I can believe that, because Bob Mortimer just, he's
a diamond. Yeah, he's
a gift. Isn't he?
Yeah. He's a 1 in a million, and like he's on rare form, because I think he loves the pod form factor, because he kind of loosens up quite a lot, and it's just a certain kind of, you could just feel the man a little bit, and he's tremendous. Yeah. I just can't say enough good things about it. It's just so good. It's making me happy. What was
it called again?
It's called Athletico Mints.
Right.
It's supposed to be about football, but it is kind of, but it's just the most ridiculous, as you'd imagine. Like, they talk about real footballing entities, but they are not in any way connected to football, their accents or anything. It's just like the comedy that they've mentioned them. But I can't do it justice. It's just got to be heard. But yeah, what's tonight? Are you working on? You said you're working on this EP.
The EP is pretty much finished.
When you say pretty much finished, have you done the mixes, or you haven't done the mixes?
So basically, there's one track. Unless I suddenly change my mind that something needs changing, there's one track that I'm working with a sax player, and I'm waiting for him to deliver one extra little part. And then once that's delivered, I'll mix the track, and then I'll sit on it for a bit and decide whether I'm putting out the whole EP as it is, or whether I'll change the track order. But yesterday I was just making loops with my Moog 1 and this rack delay, and that was giving me some ideas, because I was using it's just exactly the same approach to like all the looped piano stuff I did for Bands and Brickworks, but because I'm using a synth, this like ridiculous synth that's like intimidatingly vast.
Powerful.
It just sounds unlike anything I've done before in a way. It's because it's a whole new palette of sound. So that's kind of inspiring me at the moment. So I might do more of that.
That sounds like time well spent.
and it's quite nice to be in this position, having finished an album and pretty much finished an EP, and like I haven't got to like knuckle down on any. I haven't got to finish anything right now. I haven't got like deadlines to do specific things, so I can just experiment and feel like a student again, and which is important.
It is.
It can get a bit too serious, sometimes.
No, definitely. Man. Absolutely.
And it's good to just like mess around. Messing around leads to things.
Yeah.
And when it leads to things, you realise it wasn't messing around.